Whether you're ready for it or not, Christmas is coming. All right, guys, so Christmas time is coming. If you don't know already and you're kind of brand new to this, Christmas time is the best season for selling signs. So it's not too soon to start stocking up on signs that you can use at craft fairs or online or Christmas fairs, all that stuff. Now's the time to really kind of zero in on some Christmas designs. So today we're using our stencil of the month for November of 2024. This is called the Retro Christmas Tree. We're matching it up with our 1.5" fatty font, which I think is a great combination. These will both be linked in the description below, along with tons of other stuff. We've got router bits. Everything that we're using on the video today will be over on the website, makeawoodsign.com. So let's get started.
For this sign, we used a 20-inch piece of 1x12 pine. Now this is a super cheap board, and we talk a lot about, not really using cheap boards if you can help it, but for some people, this is really all you have access to. And this is all we had at the time we made this. So one thing you want to do is you want to make sure and check for checks in it, little cracks and stuff like that. And you'll see when we spray later on, we actually tape those up so the spray doesn't get down there and you see those black lines. When you're doing a sign with multiple lines like this, it's a good idea to do it in sections. So notice Dad gets all his lines on the board, and then he's actually going to lay out the top 2 lines, block it off, and spray that. If you try to do it all at once, you can do it, but all it takes is one little mishap, maybe moving the board, and then everything you've done is pretty much for nothing. You have to reset and reline up all your letters. It's a pain. It's happened to me several times. So doing it in sections really does help a lot. You'll notice Dad's using gloves because he's going to hold this stencil down as he's spraying it to make sure he gets a good solid line. And that's actually quite a bit easier than using a pencil or using a dowel to try to hold it down. So the first bit Dad's using is the profile bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. Now for this whole sign, he only used 3 bits, and that's including the 45-degree chamfer bit for the edge. It was a really simple carve, and it looks super nice. So basically all Dad's doing is he's going around and he's following the lines and he's carving out the black. Now it's a little bit more difficult when you get up close, like where the star is. You want to be able to feather those points in and out, and you want to be able to lift the base plate as you're going out of the points to give it that sharp point. That's one of the reasons that the base plates we have are so popular and they help carving so much. We've talked to hundreds of people that say, oh, I could never freehand carve. Well, there's really only 3 things you need: a decent piece of wood, which this really isn't, the right bits, and a base plate. It's amazing how just a little bit of practice you can carve most anything with the right tools. We got really lucky on this sign that there was no bleeding, but if you guys are using pine especially the real cheap stuff, put a couple coats of clear on it before you start your layout. That'll create a nice barrier that will keep the ink or the primer or whatever you're using from soaking real down deep into the wood so far that you just can't sand it out. Now Dad switched to the 60-degree bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. And the first thing he's going to do is he's going to go in and take out all the excess wood inside the carving of the Christmas tree. Now he's doing this with the 60-degree because there's some pretty tight areas. You could do it with a 90-degree, there's nothing wrong with that, but he's actually going to carve his letters with a 60-degree too, so there's really no reason to use an extra bit if you don't need to. One thing you want to be careful of, not just with the 60, but really with all the bits except for, say, maybe the profile, is you want to be careful not to drop the bit so far that you're actually past the flutes that cut. So 3/16, maybe a touch over, is right about the depth you're looking at with the 60-degree. If you do drop it past the cutting flutes, it's going to create a lot of burring, a lot of burning, and it's going to have a lot of drag on it. So when you first start, you might not be able to tell right away, but after you kind of get a feel for it, you'll be able to tell. and it's a really fine line. You want to carve deep enough to where you have a good depth of cut, a good width of cut, and you can see those lines really well. But if you drop it too deep, you're going to notice it right away. Something that's important but we don't talk about all that often is choosing your board. This board is real grainy, so Dad's having to go over multiple times all of his different cuts to make sure that he takes all the bobbles of the grain out. It's fairly simple. You want to look for flat grain. So if you're looking at the edge of the board and the grain is going vertical, there's a really good chance that's going to be tough to carve. You want that grain to be going as horizontal as you can. That's going to make a big difference, not only in the difficulty of the carve, but also in how the final product is going to turn out. Now, Dad's been doing this for like 50 something years, so when I have an issue with a board that's pretty grainy, usually Dad helps me straighten those lines out a little bit. But the grain makes a huge difference in the final look of your sign. To give this sign kind of a soft look, Dad's going to use the disc sander to round the corners. Now, some people are very analytical, some people are super duper picky, and they want to use a radius tool. I don't know if radius is the right word or not, but they want to use a jig to make sure to get each corner completely symmetrical with the other. Nothing wrong with that, but this is how Dad does it. He can knock this out in 30 to 45 seconds, and if you're carving on site, that time makes a huge difference. So using our 45-degree chamfer bit, Dad's going to put a real small bevel on the back and then a real deep bevel on the front. I used to say that the back one doesn't matter, but it actually does. Number one, so it helps to avoid giving people splinters when they're handling the sign. And number two, it just gives it a much more complete look. Especially when you spray the edges and you put the clear coat on it, it looks like a fully complete sign. When you leave that sharp, it just doesn't look right. Now Dad's going to spray the sign, but he's using several different colors, I think 3 altogether. So the first thing that he's doing is he's covering those little cracks in the board to make sure that the black doesn't get down in there, or green, whatever color he's going to use, and that it's going to stay there even after you sand it off. Now Dad's going to spray the tree green, and he's using the marsh green ink. There's a lot of different options you can use for colors, but basically what it boils down to is you either want to use spray ink and not spray paint, or you want to use flat or matte finish. All of those will work. The marsh green is the only green we had at the time, and Dad's had that thing for a long time. But the red is actually a matte finish Rust-Oleum. And it all sands out, especially if you put a couple clear coats on there first, like we had talked about earlier. Now once those 2 colors are dry, which takes a little bit longer than the primer, he's going to mask those off and he's going to spray the rest of the sign black with the spray primer. Once everything's all dry, and the paint and ink does take a little bit longer, but not that big a deal. But once it's all dry, then Dad's going to use a 60 grit disc on the disc sander, and he's going to use a 120 grit disc on the random orbital. And you want to make sure to blow all the sawdust off in between each sanding process. Otherwise, you kind of take the risk of grinding some of that colored sawdust back into the board. And I know for a lot of guys, they don't like sanding, so you don't want to do it twice if you don't have to. Once it's all sanded and blown off, then Dad's going to use our Rust-Oleum clear to give it a nice finish. Now we only showed 1 coat on this. We do that to save time. But usually with our signs, unless it's a table, then we do a lot more. But we generally put 4 to 5 coats on each sign.
There you go, guys. There it is. I'm really happy with the way this came out, especially considering this material. This material, I was a little iffy about it. It kind of is a very cheap, basically, version of this pine. I think maybe it's designed as a kickboard or something. So I was a little concerned about bleeding. And a little concerned about the grain. It didn't carve great, but it didn't carve bad, near as bad as I thought it would. If I handed to it over again, I think I would have done the tree outset, so then I could use Sharpies on the color. But I honestly, using the green spray and the red, it really turned out great. I really like it. Everything that we use today is in a description below, and it's over on the website, so go check it out. We've got tons of stuff over there. We so appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. We got a lot of big projects coming up you guys don't want to miss. Thanks for watching, guys. We love you. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.